how can positive thinking help my organization? How can positive thinking help my organization? I think this is particularly relevant given that we're in the middle of lockdown 2 or the coronavirus crisis, but it's also relevant at any time, I think, in terms of developing and managing your organization and the people within it. This work is prompted by Pravrajika Divyanandaprana, who is a monastic member of the Sri Sarada Math, I think Vedanta Society of Iowa. So I've gone to a person who is talking about yoga science, and I'm going to put the reference to a 30-minute video in the details below, because I just thought she said it so well. Now, I am interested in yoga science, although this, I think, is the first time that I've been formally exposed to Vedanta. But, you know, maybe I'll be looking at it in a bit more detail. What Pravrajika said was that there were 3 essential ingredients to the miracle of positive thinking. So I'm going to use her title, The Miracle of Positive Thinking. I'm going to go through, I'm going to explain what those 3 ingredients are. Then I'm going to tell a story about those 3 ingredients. And then I'm going to give you a new description of the mind that you might find useful in these times. Now, when I first came across positive thinking many years ago, I sort of poo-pooed it, because I thought my mother was very much a positive thinker, and I thought, okay, that's all right for her. But I've been involved in other forms of exploration that suggested that thinking wasn't such a good thing. But I've sort of come full circle on it, really. The way that Pravrajika explains it, I find really useful and can validate from personal experience. So her model is, in terms of the miracle of positive thinking, and therefore how you can apply it in your life, in your work, in your organization today, during the coronavirus period and after the coronavirus period, is as follows. Number 1, what you repeatedly think, you become. So what you repeatedly think, you become. And the way that Pravrajika explains it is to say that your thinking processes eventually go down into your subconscious thinking processes. They become your samsaras, forgive me if I got this wrong, and your samsaras become your tendencies, which then become your memories, and in fact your thoughts. They reoccur as your thoughts. So what you think becomes your reality. And it's obvious, if you look at the objects around us, that first they were thoughts, then they were designed, and then they became reality. So what you think becomes your reality. So it's important to look at what thoughts you're feeding yourself. The second step is what you repeatedly feel, you will experience and you will attract. What you repeatedly feel, you will experience and you will attract. And I know this is true because I sometimes am prone to melancholy, and guess what? When I'm melancholic, I tend to get a bit more melancholic. And I've also had to navigate the energy called anger, and I know for sure that to invest in anger is to create more anger. So what you repeatedly feel, you experience and you attract. And with anger, of course, what you want to do is develop a way of working with it so that you're not attached to it, so the energy can pass through you and can become compassion, and the compassion leads to love, and this is certainly a different feeling to anger. The third part of her model. I'm going to call it a model because I can tell from my own work it's a well-formed strategy, is what you imagine, you will create. What you imagine, you will create. So your imagination frames your reality. So if you can imagine a future for your organization after coronavirus, although it might not exist now, if you can imagine it, then you can create it. Maybe you have to take a step at a time. There are, for example, in our organization, I am overwhelmed with the amount of work that needs to be done to adjust to this situation and the new channels of selling. But if I take it a step of, I have an imagination, I have a picture of what the business could look like post coronavirus, and I'm working towards that a step at a time. I can do it a step at a time. So those are the three parts of her model. What you repeatedly think, you become. What you repeatedly feel, you experience. And what you imagine, you will create. And Pravrajika Divyanandaprana makes her point by telling a mythological story about a woodcutter. And, I don't have the story firsthand, so I'm going to give you a shorthand version. But a woodcutter, he's been about his woodcutting. He wants to rest. He sits down under a tree and he thinks, I could do with some food. And some food appears. This is a mythological story. Oh, well, that's very good. He eats the food and then he says, I could do with some drink. And magically some drink appears. And he doesn't question it because he's thirsty, and he gets on, he drinks it, and he has the water and the wine. And then he thinks, I'm a bit tired now, perhaps I could sleep. And magically a bed appears and he sleeps. And while he's sleeping, he kind of feels a bit odd, and he kind of wonders whether he gets a funny feeling that he's asked for food and it appeared, he'd asked for drink, it appeared, he wished about beds and it appeared, and then he starts to wonder if there might be some ghosts about. And guess what? The ghosts appeared, and this sort of frightens him a bit, and then he imagines that there might be some wild animals about, and guess what? A wild animal, a tiger, appears and eats him. So the moral of this story is, I suppose, be careful what you imagine. Now, why did this happen? In the background to the story, they say that he didn't know that he was sitting under a wishing tree. And this is the bit really that is relevant to us all today. The wishing tree is called your mind. So, how can positive thinking help my organization? What you repeatedly think, you will become. What you repeatedly feel, you will experience. And what you can imagine, you will create. And we all have the wishing tree called the mind.